Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I did this drawing of a goldfish in graphite. Now this little project is only 4 by 6 inches, so I don't have lots of space to add tiny detail, but this enables us to really focus on the importance of values and contrast. Now the first thing I like to do, regardless of the size of the portrait or the medium, is to map in the eye. I want to make sure that I've got the shape and size of that eye accurate. Now throughout this project I'm going to be using tools such as my erasers and my paper blending stumps as much as the graphite pencils themselves. Now I love using graphite powder for my base layer, and I will usually apply that with a eye makeup applicator, and if I was working on a larger project then that would be my go-to method. Now of course you can use different sized paper blending stumps. Here I'm using a smaller size just because of the project that I'm working on, but you've got a couple of options for applying your graphite powder. Now as you can see I am working in very small sections, and this is my preferred way of working because I feel like I don't skip through important layers. If I block in the whole subject with my base layer and then I do my next layer and so on, I do feel like I might potentially start to cut corners. So by working just in these small areas I'm able to get that about 80% complete and then move on to the next. Now the only exception with working on something like this, because it was so small, there were some areas where I felt like it linked onto the other. So this would be the same if I'm working on longer fur texture. Because it overlaps in many different ways, I'll usually work in a slightly larger area than I would something else. But with this, because those values on the body for instance and then the top of the head, they were very smooth. There were times then when I worked on a little bit more of a larger area. Now something that I speak a lot about in the real-time version of this tutorial on Patreon is the importance of trust in the process. I felt like when I was working on the front surface of the face here that it wasn't looking ideal. I just didn't feel like it was looking as realistic as it could. However, it was just because I didn't have anything else drawn in. As I started to work on the top part of the body and the fins, that therefore meant that it was linked onto something else, and I was able to then visualize more of that reference photo in my drawing. So if you're working on something and you feel like something's not quite right but you're not sure what it is, I would recommend to get the area around it complete, and then if it's still bothering you, you can go back and try to work out what it is. It might just be that there's a highlight and shadow not quite in the right place, because that can massively affect the shape of the face and therefore what that animal looks like compared to the reference photo. Now as I continue to add in some of my highlights with my eraser and then coming back in with some of my pencils to darken up some areas in between, this is where I'm starting to reinforce those contrasts and values. Now the importance of contrast is something I speak about in all of my tutorials regardless of the medium, and it's because that's what helps to make that animal look three-dimensional. Now one of the most common questions I'm asked regarding colour is how do we know which pencils or paint colours to mix? Now if colour was so important, then graphite portraits, charcoal portraits, they wouldn't look realistic. It's those values, the contrast, your lights and your darks that have more of the impact. So this is why I always focus on it on every single one of my lessons. And as you can see here, I'm building up those values and that contrast in stages. I don't start off with a really dark layer. I build up those dark values gradually. Now something that I mentioned at the beginning of this video is sizing, and depending on the size of artwork we do need to judge how much detail we can include. Now if you're looking to add more detail, more realism, then we want to be working on a larger scale. But for this project I really did want to focus on the size roughly of a sketchbook, so that we can focus on how to refine the importance of contrast and values. And as I start to get more of this portrait drawn in, you can see that it's the highlights, the shadows that are making this look three-dimensional. There's not individual scales that I'm drawing on the face at all. I've got a few of those that I'm going to add in on the body just because the body is a little bit larger, but it's not over the top. There might be maybe 10 scales in one area, whereas in the actual reference photo and on this fish, you would have potentially hundreds. So it's about giving the impression of detail through having your values and contrast correct. Now this kind of project is ideal for any artists who are new to graphite because we don't have lots of detail that we're trying to capture. There's no fur, there's no feathers, and as I said, there's only a few scales to add. But what this does teach us is the importance of how to shade, how to work with a good base layer, and how to use those pencils with the correct amount of pressure and of course, as you can see here, how to use the erasers. Now, using erasers is something that I put a lot of emphasis on in my real-time tutorials because they can only work in the right way to the best of their potential if the graphite is applied correctly in the first place. Now, if too much pressure is applied to the pencils and we burnish is where you flatten the tooth of the paper, then those erasers are going to have a much harder time to lift that graphite off of the paper. So you might feel like the erasers aren't working, when actually the erasers are trying to do their job, but it's just because the graphite's been applied in the wrong way. And this is one other main aspect that I cover in all of my real-time tutorials on Patreon. And because my real-time tutorials are recorded with a voiceover while I'm drawing, everything is explained in the moment. And I think that's really important. It helps to add that extra guidance throughout the lessons. Now, when I worked on the fins, you can see here that I am hinting at some kind of detail, but it's not intricate, delicate detail. I'm just hinting at the lighter midtones and then my darker shadows, really capturing the movement of the fin by making sure that the values are correct. We can hint at that detail through curving those highlights and shadows. It makes it look like that top fin is bending and slightly curving with the shape of the body, almost like the fish is swimming towards us. Now, if we didn't get the pencil strokes right in terms of how they're curved, then we're not going to have that effect. It's going to look more two-dimensional. Now, as I work on the tail, this is where that's going to become more apparent. The pencil technique is very important, and it's also what we use when drawing fur. So the main fundamental techniques that I'm using here can be transferred across to any other animal. I'm focusing on three main things: the pencil direction, the pencil thickness, and the pencil length. So the strokes and the movement I'm creating with the pencil are all going to be determined by how I'm moving the pencil, the pressure that's applied, how sharp the lead is, and so on. Now, the way that I'm moving my pencil, this is going to help determine the movement of the fin, or if you're drawing fur or feathers, the way that that is moving as well. Now, they're not random, they follow the underlying bone and muscular structure, but because the tail of this fish is quite long, it's able to flow in the movement of the water as well. So you're going to have to really focus on the way that those lights and darks curve if you are working on drawing a fish that is moving. The way that it's curved is going to help to build up that movement in that piece. And because my pencil strokes here are curved in a few different directions, so it comes out from the base of the body, it curves up towards the top right corner and then across to the right hand side, by capturing those main transitional directional changes, I'm able to really focus on the flow of this tail, making it look like this fish is swimming. So it's at this stage now where the fish was about 80% complete, and I really wanted to have a look at a distance, take a step back from my easel and see what needed to be adjusted. So I'm going to start to come in and reinforce the lights and the darks. So as you can see here, I'm coming in with a slightly darker pencil, lighter pressure, because this pencil can go very dark if needed, and just coming in and adding in more of my shadows. And as you can see, I'm sort of adding more definition to the mouth, the shape of the face. If I don't add these alterations here, then I'm going to end up something that isn't as three-dimensional as it could be. Now, adding in these darks and lights, it makes a huge difference. So always take that time, those few extra minutes, to have a look and see what needs to be adjusted. A prime example is those highlights here on the tail. Just again, look at how that emphasizes the movement. So to balance up this portrait, I added a few bubbles around the goldfish and then I called it finished. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up, because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you would like to draw along to this tutorial or any of my real-time step-by-step lessons, then I'll link my Patreon in the description below. If you have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video in the next few days, but as always, thank you so much for watching.